Santiago. Sego's gonna go se waguego. What winum radon. Terri-Lynn Brennan Jungyats, Gunyaka Haga British, and Jojo Dan. Goweno Gweski Goweno de Gunyagari, a Shrigan Digiteron. So hello, and welcome to this land in which we all currently share, live, work, and play on. My name is Terri-Lynn Brennan, and I identify as mixed Mohawk, people of the Flint, and British. I currently live on Long Island Standing, colonially known as Wolfe Island off the coast of Kingston in eastern Ontario, an area of Turtle Island that has been occupied by some of my ancestors for millennia. In the modern era, my family comes from Six Nations of the Grand River and Brantford, Ontario, respectively. I have light skin, dark eyes with pale rim glasses, and short dark hair, brown hair. I currently have on a light-colored sweater over a dark undersweater, if you will, and I'm sitting in my kitchen. My background is my kitchen, mostly with light-colored wood surrounding me, and some coffee-colored paint on the wall. In the language of my ancestors, in my opening few words, I asked, as expected in my tradition upon meeting new people, is, do you still carry the Great Peace? And it's part of our practice to ask so, because it's a peace that has unified the Haudenosaunee Confederacy many centuries ago, and it's a humbling way to ensure that we have all come to a gathering or coming to a meeting with the intentions of respect, kindness, and generosity. We therefore agree to listen with not only our ears, but also with our hearts and our minds. As the tradition in my people, we are instructed that prior to any business taking place, we say and offer the words of the Onagari Dedekwa, which is, you might know it as the Thanksgiving address. Now, the Thanksgiving address in proper recitation would take perhaps up to 3 days. I'm going to give it to you in a very short form, which is basically an acknowledgement that we thank all of creation that surrounds us and provides for us, from the trees to the water, to the sun and the moon, to the four-legged, six-legged, two-legged, grasses, medicines, berries, universe and stars, the winds, the rains. All of the things that surround us can survive without us, but we need to humbly recognize that we cannot survive without any of the things I just mentioned. And so with that, I'd like to welcome you again to this webinar, I guess, and I'll pass it back to Victoria to offer a little bit of housekeeping.
Greetings. Thank you very much for your kind and welcoming words, Terri-Lynn. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Victoria Steele, and I'm chair of the board of Arts Consultants Canada. And I'm zooming in from the beautiful unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, otherwise known now as the National Capital Region. And I have curly gray hair. Our program committee is very excited to put this panel together. I want to acknowledge all of them and the Department of Canadian Heritage for supporting this, for Maurizio and Jennifer, who are behind the scenes, and to all of you who chose to submit questions in advance. This is the fourth in a series of webinars designed to build the capacity of Canadian consultants working in the cultural sector as we recover from COVID-19. And a wee little plug for next week's webinar, which is going to talk about the challenges facing the cultural workforce, and will be delivered by Nathalie Courville of Experts en Français. Can't wait to hear what they have to say. For those who don't know, Arts Consultants Canada is Canada's National Association of Professional Consultants. For the past 17 years, we've served as a community practice for individual consultants who work supporting our sector. And our membership adheres to professional code of conduct and has programs including professional development activities such as the one you're attending today. A couple of Zoom protocols. We're using Q&A, not the chat today. And we are recording for this to be available later on the website through YouTube. And we're providing captioning for those of you who wish it, which you can find on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. And I think that's enough housekeeping from me. And over to our wonderful, wonderful moderator, Terri-Lynn Brennan.
Yeah, well, thank you, Victoria. I would love to have each of my or our guests today provide a little bit of their own story for everyone to share. Thank you. Valerie, you want to start?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Valerie Singh Turner. It's morning where I am on the Coast Salish territories on which I was born and raised. I am participating from the stolen, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's the people I have been very privileged to have worked with a number of elders and Indigenous artists who have been really patient and understanding in helping me learn and unlearn the colonial ways I've been brought up with, because I'm third generation Chinese Canadian. My grandparents all immigrated from southern China in the early 1900s. And I'm a multidisciplinary artist. So I work mostly in theater, although I've recently been working in opera as a librettist. I have a dance background, a music degree. I'm a writer, a playwright. And so I bring a number of different artistic perspectives. My pronouns are she, hers. I have shoulder length, dark hair with some red streaks in it. I mentioned before, I'm a third generation Chinese Canadian, so I'm Asian. Pretty short, not too short in terms of Asianness, but pretty short in terms of everybody else. I'm wearing a green, forest green turtleneck because I may cough once in a while, so I'll try to make sure my mic is off when I have that fit coming on me. And I'm sitting in my living space on a brown couch. I think the only other things I'd like to say is that I founded a company in Vancouver called Visceral Visions, which is a nonprofit arts organization. And while we obviously develop and produce artistic works, our biggest initiative to date is a digital platform called culturebrew.art, which features a national searchable database of Indigenous and racialized artists who work in the performing and literary arts and the media arts. And we will soon be adding visual artists to that after we have consultations with them later in March. Over to you, Santiago.
Thank you very much, Valerie, and thank you, Terri-Lynn. I'm very, very happy to be joining you today in this conversation. My name is Santiago Guzmán. My pronouns are he and they. I am currently joining you today from Fredericton, New Brunswick, the unceded homelands of the Mi'kmaq, the Passamaquoddy, and the Wolastoqey. But I'm actually, the place that I call home today is St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk, for the island that we call Newfoundland. Otherwise, it is called Uktatunguk. And for the island of, for Labrador, it would be the ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nipissing and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and the Inuit of Nunatsiavut. I come from Mexico. I was born and raised in Mexico, and I moved to this part of the land in 2015 to pursue a theater degree as an actor. And upon graduation, I decided to stay and be a part of this beautiful community that opened their arms, welcomed me into the industry. I am here because I'm an artist. I do primarily theater and filmmaking. I'm a writer. I am a performer. I'm a director. I'm a producer. I am the artistic director for a theater company in Newfoundland called Todos Productions, which seeks to support, produce, develop, and champion the work of underrepresented artists in our community. And that means artists that historically have been silenced and oppressed. And I am also the artistic associate for Playwrights Atlantic Research Center, I love new play development, and I think that I have found um, a space for my voice and other people like me who historically have not been seen or heard through new play development. So I love it. What else can I say? Oh, yes, I have long curly hair. It's dark. I am wearing a navy blue turtleneck, and I have a checkered scarf with navy blue, gray, yellow, orange, and pink. And I'm wearing a pair of glasses. And I am so happy to be joining you today. So thank you for having me. Over to you, Terri-Lynn.
Thank you both. I'm feeling very humbled to be in the same conversation with the both of you right now. I do not have an on the stage presence in the arts sector. I'm an administrator for the most part, covering both arts and heritage. That's kind of been my career forever and a day. So I'm always excited to talk to those that are more used to the performing side of it, as opposed to those of us who sit behind desks, unfortunately. And so we'll get right into it. And I think that what has kind of spurned conversation between the three of us already is the title. So, how to look at idea, inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And for us, I think we each look at it maybe in a different way, but let's start there. So I'll leave it up to which one of you wants to start. But how do you think or define the concept of idea?
We're just so polite. Well, I have a complicated relationship to that notion. I feel like I find it's so easy to group all of these things into one acronym, that sometimes everything is, I don't want to say washed on the same color, but it sort of feel like everything is the same. Where I think that we lack or we stop thinking about the specificity of what each word means. But most importantly to me is what is it that we're trying to do at the end of the day and how we're doing it. Um, I think a lot about that. I think that as a racialized queer immigrant person, I think about what it means to be inclusive, how to be diverse, equitable, and create points of access. But I have come to understand that these terms have been defined by a norm that historically has not included me. So it's all about um, welcoming me into a system that was not made for me, that was not designed for people like me to thrive, where they're, in a very positive way trying to um, get me in without really thinking about what does it mean to be in, who is already in, who's keeping the knowledge in. Um, so when I think about all of these things, I feel like, inevitably I do strive to engage and represent diverse perspectives. And to me, it's about that, about like creating space for voices and experiences in the work that I do. And understanding that we all have different entry points and we find ourselves in different places, and how do we support each other for all of us to thrive in a similar or the same environment. So those are some initial thoughts. What do you think? What are you thinking, Valerie?
Well, I agree with everything you've said, Santiago. I have some pretty strong views about all the words that we tend to be using in this quest for equity and justice. I think the part of the idea of idea leaves out really important concepts like justice. And I personally would like to get rid of the word diversity completely. For me, it's a 4-letter word. I feel like it was like so last decade, because it's led to really a very surfacey, to me, and performative idea of diversity, where as long as we have a few different colors or a few different genders or whatever in the room, as you say, Santiago, it's a very surface layer kind of inclusion. And I also have the same problem with the word inclusion, because again, it's like, well, you bring people in the room, but you don't make, there's very little thought as to how that room has historically not been welcome to people and how that space should be shifted in a number of different ways in order to actually embrace people's different perspectives and lived experiences and expertise, to be frank. This idea that we bring people in, but, as long as they're quiet and don't make us uncomfortable, we've done our job. And whereas I know from personal experience, oftentimes my very presence makes people uncomfortable. And so that creates a dynamic that makes it hard for me to bring my entire self into the room, to speak my truth. And at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is power, the shifting in power, who has it, who doesn't. And when you're being invited or included or being brought into rooms simply because of your difference, without any kind of consideration about the power dynamics that will allow or not allow people to participate fully, that's deeply problematic. So I like to talk about radical inclusion, because that means I want people to think beyond tokenism. And so what does radical inclusion mean? And so for me, that's more actionable for people to go, oh, okay, I'm thinking about inclusion, but what does radical inclusion mean? And so to think beyond, like, as you say, Santiago, like, you invite some people in the room, but who else is missing? Who is not in the room? Who has not been invited to speak? But equity, awesome. Accessibility, awesome. I like to talk about representation. And I also like to talk about decolonization as a replacement for the D. Rather than diversity, let's talk about decolonization, which for me is a process, because people could say, oh, I have like so many diverse people in the room. Also, I don't like saying people are diverse. I don't understand what that means, because I'm not diverse within myself. I can create diversity in comparison to other people, but I'm not a diverse person. Now I've lost my train of thought. So I was talking about decolonization, that it's a process. So it's not done. We can say diversity is done, but as soon as we have somebody who's different from everybody else. But that's not achieving really anything meaningful.
Wow. Thank you both. Yes, so many touch points for me in what you both shared. And I'm glad you went to the decolonization D, Valerie, because that's one of my words that I throw into any acronym these days. There was a local leader who used to always say, you decolonize the mind to re-indigenize the land. And that stuck with me years ago. And to think about what that truly means is critical in today's conversations. And as you say, these words, Santiago, the idea, these words are English words. These are words that already have a dictionary definition to them that everybody can look up on Wikipedia and get that colonial understanding of what they are. But for people who are in the equity deserving space, these words are not representative necessarily of what it is we need. and or the direction we need society and colonial society to go. So it's, again, I started at a language that is an inherited language. We don't have, certain words in that have to do with anger and all of these concepts of negativity. It's a very different way to think about language and relationships. And these concepts need to be thinking about relationships as opposed to defined categories of things, if you will, because we're not things, we're people. And inclusion, diversity, they're problematic and they're rote now. I think of the word reconciliation, and I do not like that word anymore because it's just thrown out there. It's thrown out there, as you say, to be performative. And it's an English word. It's not a word of true relationship. So fabulous. Great start. Okay, so let's keep going.
Actually, I'd love to add something to a couple of things you brought up, Terri-Lynn, because they're really generative to me, those ideas. I love what you said about decolonize the mind to indigenize the land. That is amazing. I've written it down and I'm going to say where I got it. You said it was an elder that you got it from, but
yeah, re-indigenize the land.
Re-indigenize. Thank you. And I also have had a lot of, strong feelings about this idea of reconciliation. For me, I think a lot of people forget the truth part. And also I go, how can you reconcile with an abusive relationship? I find that a really difficult thing to wrap my head around. Because, the original colonizers had a thoroughly abusive relationship in terms of Indigenous people. So this idea that, if I was a woman in a toxic domestic relationship with a partner, the idea that I would reconcile with the person because of the violence inflicted on me is again this weird, to me, kind of Christian, you have to do the forgiveness, kind of thing. But the abuser doesn't have to actually acknowledge the truth. And so I think that's a really important thing that's missing from IDEA. And actually, the reason why I did a keynote speech some years ago, obviously before the pandemic, and, talking about diversity versus decolonization when I talked about, and I had a theme about the double standard. And one of the things I liked about decolonization, accessibility, representation, and equity, because the acronym is actually there. And so I was saying, so then that's more actionable. You dare to take risks. You dare to eliminate the double standards or the injustice you see. You dare to, do something.
I like that. I like that a lot. I haven't heard dare. That's really, really brilliant. And I also, I wanted to, you reminded me of something else you were hitting upon too, in regards to being, radical inclusion was the concept you were thinking of. And that reminded me of this amazing kind of little cheat sheet for non-Indigenous folks that came out of the Rideau network in Montreal, that basically said, for folks to become an ally, you can do all these things. But the reality is you don't want to just be an ally. You want to be an accomplice, because an accomplice is actionable. And it basically is saying you are now an accomplice to decolonization. You're an accomplice to equity, serving peoples and it's equity deserving people's actions and work and platforming those voices in a real way, in a true way. As you say, it's one thing to bring people to a table, but if they don't have a voice, if they don't have any decision-making power or leadership accountability, it's so token. It's incredibly token. Yeah.
And I just want to add one more thing because you brought up the issue or the concept of anger and how that's seen as negative. And since we're talking about action, I think anger is actually an amazing thing. I think anger get the bad rap because anger can come out of, like, for me, because I've been angry most of my life. Anger is a precursor, I think a necessary precursor to action. Because when we're just sad about something or guilty about something or feeling shameful about something, for me, that's really passive and it sits in yourself. And I like to think of the idea of righteous anger. I mean, when I see injustice, I get angry. And that means I'm going to do something about it, whether it's talking to other people about it or whether, I'm going to write a letter to my MP or my member of the local legislative assembly here in British Columbia, or start a petition or start a movement or organize a meeting. Like I've never organized something because I'm sad. And I've never organized something because I'm calm. I feel like, I think the accusation of being angry is used against doing something productive. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because, like I said, anger gets a bad rap.
In that context, absolutely. I guess where I was thinking is that the comparison of certain words and how they represent a direct or concept or idea doesn't always translate into other languages. And so I just, I think about, kind of the three main laws or associated pathways to the laws for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And one of those words is power. And in the colonial concept of power, it's very much about domination and oppression. But in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy law, it really means power translates into responsibility and being accountable to your community and being respectfully taking on how and what you do for that community. And it's a very different way to think about such a colonial word such as power. But yeah, Santiago, are we running away with this from you or?
No. I'm definitely just like taking in all of the wisdom that you're sharing, and thank you for that. Yeah, like I'm thinking about having these conversations, these exact conversations was a thing that like people like me, I have been having for years. These are not new conversations about how I have felt and how I wanted, I had a voice and nobody was listening to me, and all of a sudden in the recent years, all of a sudden I became an expert in all of these subject matters, and I'm like, wow, I actually came here to study theater and to do theater. Like that's what I came here to do. Now in this labor, like I am very passionate about change. I believe in change. I believe in transformation. And that is the thing that keeps me excited about having these conversations. But certainly it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, we are doing a lot of talking and we have been doing a lot of talking and listening, but what are we doing? Like what, and maybe it's because I am a writer and I write because I want my plays to be performed. I think it's the same thing when we're speaking and we're talking. It's because we are going somewhere with these conversations. So on one hand, I am extremely grateful that, at a board meeting, there is a little, time allocated to talk about this notion of idea, right? On one hand, I'm like, oh, at least there is some space carved into the conversation. I think that, and in my personal experience, being in rooms where most of the times I am leading those conversations, is that we are missing the perspective that this is an intersectional work and it is everyone's responsibility. I think that it is so easy to think, well, let's ask Santiago, who is very passionate to talk about, diversity of inclusion or representation. But when we're looking at transformation, it has to be intersectional and it has to be community oriented because, Valerie said, I am not diverse by myself, in a group of people, I can be diverse, but I can't do it by myself. I am no representative of diversity. I am no representative of all the access needs that have to be met or that we have to consider in the way that we work. So I think that, one of the things that I try to think about is like, how do we go about that, about transformation, about community engagement? And to really, I think that, like we're so afraid of making mistakes or of just saying the wrong thing. And this is something that I got when I was in high school and my math teacher. I was really bad at fractions and she really helped me through, but I was really committed to getting like an A+. I really wanted an A+. I really wanted an A+. And I would get mad when I was get good grades. And then my teacher said to me, like, why are you getting mad at yourself? You should be paying attention on your mistakes. And I was like, I don't want to make mistakes. She was like, well, you're not perfect and you learn from your mistakes. So next time that you're, doing your homework, you will understand what you did wrong and you will not do it again. And that to me, that is a lesson that I have taken with me and that I apply really to my entire life, that making mistakes is such a powerful tool of learning. And I think that when we're talking about these subject matters about transformation, I am certain that I have said things that perhaps have caused harm, even when I had zero intentions of causing harm. But I need to take responsibility for that harm and to make a plan and a commitment to never do it again. And I think that that's what excites me about these conversations that are rooted in action, in transformation.
Brilliant. And you've gone down a path that's very, poignant for me because the one teaching, the one legal principle, in Haudenosaunee legal principles, or even within the Anishinaabe grandfather teachings, which most people are more familiar with, the idea and the concept of humility is my most heartfelt concept that I try and have people really think about, especially non-oppressed people, because that's the truth to starting to decolonize. If you can be humble enough to look at yourself and realize your mistakes. Like I'm even thinking about things I've already said in the last half hour going, oh, you know what? I shouldn't have maybe said it that way. But it's what comes out in the passion of the moment when you're with like-minded people. And so having these conversations, as you say, they have to happen. They have to happen more often. And then take that back to, again, be humble enough to understand how can I make this, or how can I be more cohesive in making this better for other people, and therefore, the people I represent as well. And I'm not, by goodness, I'm certainly not the only Indigenous person on the planet. There are millions of us, but within the Canadian context, we often are, as you say, get pulled out as the token person in the room to be that representative model. And I certainly don't speak for all Haudenosaunee or Okwehonwe people or Mohawk people, or people who live on Wolf Island. This is me. This is what I've grown up with, and this is what I have been taught or understood and interpreted through my being. And the concept of humility is the most important thing for me in my life. Yeah.
I love what the two of you have been saying about responsibility and accountability and humility, and how, we can only represent ourselves at any given moment. I remember like I was once invited, to a retirement party for a senior member of the arts community. And I was asked, to speak on behalf of the Vancouver Chinatown community. I went, I have no connection with the Vancouver Chinatown community. Like, I wasn't born here. I wasn't raised here. I was born on Vancouver Island. Like, and even then, if someone said, you would represent the Victoria Chinatown community, I'd go no, because I don't have that relationship. I don't feel comfortable representing, all the different. And not only that, often, when you're asked to sit on grand juries and stuff, as the only Asian person in the room, I'm supposed to represent all the, like, because people forget there's diversity within Asian cultures as well. I mean, there's Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, like, and then, sometimes you're the only person of color. So now I'm supposed to be representing all the different communities. Like, it's a big burden to carry. And it's an unfair burden to place on people for sure. And also this idea, like, yes, I have some expertise from, my lived experience. And because frankly, I've done some work like reading and engaging with people and different communities. So oftentimes I know that, in the rush to be diverse, I've seen it backfire because they've invited somebody who is racialized, who is really only at the very beginning of their journey of understanding the issues. And as you said, Terri-Lynn, like, when I started on this journey, I made a ton of mistakes and I didn't know about various things. I know a lot more now, but I also know I still have so much more to learn and unlearn because, these systems are insistent, on seeing the world in a particular way. And it's really hard when the media is just full of one way of seeing things and you're trying desperately to connect the dots of a different way, the real way. I kind of feel like, in the Matrix, you take the red pill and you can't see the world the same any longer. And can get really disheartening and depressing. But at the same time, like once you have swallowed the red pill, like that's when your journey starts.
I love that because I do the same. Yes. There is a question. Actually, Valerie, can you repeat the acronym DARE, what each of those letters stands for again?
Oh, sure. So D is for decolonization. A is for accessibility or access. R is for representation. And E is for equity. And yes, I made that up. I haven't heard that anywhere else. But, because people had different acronyms, IDEA was one of the ones that I think this was back in 2018 where IDEA was sort of coming out or people were starting to use it. And I was going, I think we need another one.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Valerie, and this is just like a question I love when you spoke about how this acronym is actually actionable, like there is an action infused in it. And I wonder if anti-racism is somewhere in there, or is that like another thing that we should, also think about?
I mean, there are so many things that justice isn't in there, as I spoke about before. For me, decolonization it embodies anti-racism because colonization for me, or my current kind of way of thinking about colonization, is it's so embedded in white supremacy that to decolonize is to interrogate white supremacy. And so that for me includes the idea of anti-racism. But really, we're talking about white supremacy, or at least I am. And that's sort of intersectional, right? Because, we have anti-Asian sentiment, which, grew exponentially during the early period of the pandemic. We have anti-Black racism for sure. And there's indigeneity, and there's Islamophobia, like all of those things. And for me, like that, it's important to recognize the specificity of what underlies each of those, the discrimination and abuse and hatred for each of those separate groups. But for me, it's hard. It's another way of dividing us. And if we just go, it's actually white supremacy and colonialism and the patriarchy. Let's just throw all of them in there at once. That then we can start to see a bigger picture and form alliances and have each other's backs, rather than fighting over the crumbs from the pie. Which is, divide and conquer. They're gonna keep doing. They indigenous nations and communities, they're constantly using the tactic of divide and conquer. And so, and if you look at, opening that up and including all of us who've been marginalized and suppressed and oppressed and dismissed and erased and made invisible, we will make more progress, I think, if we recognize that underlying the root things impact all of us in different ways, of course, because we have different intersections of identity and challenges. But yeah.
No, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that for sure. And I think that, like I sometimes we're getting into this place of like trying to, to find who we are or to define who we are. And sometimes it just feels like it's a competition of who's the most marginalized person in the room. And it's, to me anyway, it's not about that. It's not about finding who is the one who is suffering. We are at several points in our lives, we will be marginalized for whatever reason. And it's not about who is winning that competition, And I really like talking about systemic change, because then we get to the root of the problem, which is what you, Valerie, was talking about. And I think that to me is where the attention really has to go. Like, okay, so what is the system that has been imposed by someone, and who it has been, put on our table, and then we have been eating from without questioning the menu. So what is our labor? What do we have to do in order to change that? And I think that is something that I find really helpful as I, try to navigate my relationship to these systems that I inherently uphold, because I haven't questioned that I do have a responsibility in all of these systems. So then when I take that responsibility, when I'm accountable for my part, then I feel like I can do something about it. And it doesn't have to be, like it's so easy to get overwhelmed with the big picture, with something that perhaps, I may not be even alive to see things change in the way that I hope they will be. But at least I know that, whatever small step I can take, it's not in vain.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. And so many things in there that twigged with me in the sense of, you know, how can we help the system change? Because at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. It's got to do with the system and the systemic issues. So a lot of the work that I do when I work with organizations, I right away say, that's great that you have, you have a Black person on your board, or you have someone who is disabled by the system, as a volunteer. But what's your retention rate like for people who are equity deserving? How long do they stick around? What extra supports have you put in place? Because the system isn't written for us. What have you changed in your policies to acknowledge the difference in those people? And certainly within the arts sector, how many venues have actually started to change their policies to include the extra, needs of ceremony or spiritual guidance that come with our stories? and the reality of that. It's not hard work. There's nothing here that's hard work, but it is change. And change is the challenge that people in power are really scared to give up. At the end of the day, it's got to do with fear. And that's critical, I think, to have these conversations and to have people recognize how they continue to uphold the colonial system in everything they do. And it's good to question. It's good to question it. Last week at the Push Talking Stick Festival, there was a gentleman who was talking about producing and all of the roles of a producer. And my question to him was, well, why are all those roles having to be with a producer? That's the system created that component to that job description. But why do we have to stick with that job description? Why do we have to stay within that box? We are at a time to rewrite that box.
I'm so glad you brought up systems, Santiago, and your remarks, Terri-Lynn, about fear and who gets to define what people do or how we work together. And I think what came up for me in talking about systems and fear and who has the power is because I have to, well, I don't have to. I don't need to remind myself because I'm aware of it. But I would like to remind other people that the arts, we don't work in a vacuum. We are part of larger society. And I think that, when people have really good intentions about doing the work of idea, and they wonder how they get to start or afraid of doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, which prevents them from taking action. I really encourage people to know what's happening in the outside world, because that is the impetus to change. I mean, I know for myself, when my Black friends go visit the United States, I'm afraid they might not come back because it's a very real possibility that they could be in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong police officer and they won't come home. We look at the Freedom Convoy, and how those protesters were treated compared to the Wet'suwet'en people in British Columbia. It recently came out in the news that the RCMP had spent $21 million to terrorize them for the last couple of years, all for a coastal gas link. Everything from having snipers. I can't imagine being in my home in Canada and having a sniper, watching me day and night. And for an axe-wielding RCMP officer to axe through my front door. Like, that is terrorism. And we are paying for it. We are condoning this as citizens of Canada. We are condoning this and paying for it out of our taxes. And, I just want, what the latest thing I read in the news. So, people need to read the news. We need to know what's happening. For artists, it informs my work. If I don't know what's happening out there, how is my work worth shit as an artist? The latest thing I've been reading about is there was 50 lawyers in Alberta who sent a petition to the Alberta Law Society protesting ostensibly against the Alberta Law Society having the ability to have a mandatory course, to mandate a course that must be taken or they would be suspended. And the course happens to be an Indigenous training course, a training course about Indigenous culture, history, and legal issues in Canada. And when they interviewed the lead lawyer, who was actually from China, who had immigrated here, and he said, well, I don't see systemic racism. Systemic racism doesn't exist in Canada. I'm going, how the fuck does he know? What expertise is he talking about? How would he know? if he doesn't know anything? Anyway,
And not to go all the way back, but your comment about Black friends going to the States. I know a lot of, Black friends who would say, you don't have to go to the States, just in Canada, the same fear, especially in like Toronto and the surrounding area. Sorry, folks from the GTA, but that is a reality that I have had a lot of Black colleagues and friends say to me as well. Will my son come home from school today? Is a huge question for a lot of Black families all the time.
yeah, and the amount of harassment that they encounter from the police, just stopping them, like they're just doing their thing, and everything. They're just smoking a cigarette on the sidewalk, or just driving their car, or just sitting in a coffee shop, and that applies to Indigenous folks as well. They're also over-policed, especially in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And that also leads to a lot of terrible outcomes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Six Nations, I'm always critical of certain media outlets as well, because they're all very skewed and partisan in their own way. And they don't showcase all the stories. Certainly that came out a couple of years ago with, University X and the whole thing around that, and the Caledonian property issues. There was a lot of violence that occurred for loads of people that I know the country didn't hear a word about it. There's a lot of picking and choosing of what it's important to share with others. Absolutely. So as we're kind of rounding out a bit of time, can we say something positive about, what should be encouraged for any, listeners who want to know how can I be more, collegial to the point of being, a radical, inclusive accomplice to equity deserving artists?
Well, just building on what we were just saying, I would just like to say that the stakes are high. Like, people are dying. People are being actively harmed. And so if that doesn't spur you to action, I don't know what will.
And then that raises the question, what if folks aren't hearing the reality or the truth? What venues are out there to learn more that are realistic and truthful?
I just want to, I will answer that question, Terri-Lynn. I was just really thinking about, about what is happening. So my train of thought just went, it was like this, and then it went like this, and then it's a little bit lost. But I just wanted to comment on, that we all have a responsibility. It is all of our job to be aware, of when you enter a room, you can quickly see who is in the room and who is not. And it's so easy for us to surround ourselves with the same people, which is fine. But then it gets to a point that it's important for us to open up the perspectives, the conversations, the lived experience of people that perhaps don't have the same background that you do. Like I find that a lot in myself, and I think that when we're talking about like learning about what is happening in the media and in the news, I would encourage people to just like get to know their communities better. I think that it's so easy for us to say, oh, thank God this is not happening here. It is happening here. It is happening outside your house, 2 blocks down the road. It is happening. But it's so easy to protect ourselves and our loved ones by denying that and saying, no, it's okay. So my encouragement to all of us is to realize that it is happening and that we are all a part of it, and our ignorance, our lack of knowledge is contributing to the development and the upholding of these systems and the current climate. I think, and I feel like I went to a university here in Canada, and I realized that all of my teachers, like as an example, were white. And that perspective to me, for 4 years of a bachelor degree in fine arts, it was, even though it was very different, it was diverse within itself, it was the same perspective. And when I left university, even before I left, I made my own task to learn from Indigenous and racialized artists, because that's what I did not get. So this is the thing that I was saying about like entering to a room and acknowledging who is there and who is missing. And it was a very simple task. I mean, simple, obviously for different systems, these teachings and these artists have not been highlighted in the same, equitable way than others. So I guess I point this out because I would encourage us all to think about, who are we learning from? Who is putting, their lived experience, their knowledge, their expertise to the world? And where is the source of the information coming from? And it's the same thing of like, check on who you're following on your social media. Is it the same people that you're following on your social media? Like, do you have an indigenous artist that you're following that you can learn from their art? Creative thinkers. I think that it is important to really take a moment once in a while and look at the music that we're listening to, the books that we're reading, the things that we're consuming, the TV shows that we're watching, right? And when you look at what you have in front of you, to say, there is something missing in the picture. And how can I actively open up myself to different perspectives?
And that was brilliant, because you've just reminded me of two sayings I used to always start off facilitation sessions with. I don't do them as much as I used to, so they were out of my mind. But the first one is always, you don't know what you don't know. And the second one is, how do you know what you know? I.e., when you think about your textbooks in university, how many of them were not written by an older white, middle class to upper class, abled, heterosexual, man? And the reality is very limited, of that. And unfortunately, even today in universities, that is still the most populous norm. So thank you for that. That was great.
I'll just add 2 ideas or for people to think about. One of the ones I like to work with is productive discomfort. If we're not uncomfortable in situations when we're talking about equity or trying to do the work of equity or decolonization, then we're doing it wrong. I mean, and I'm not just talking about, white people, although, that's usually sort of the assumption is. Like, for me personally, as a non-Indigenous person, I have to sit with myself and understand that I know very, very little about Indigenous cultures, and that, anytime an Indigenous elder or artist, chooses to share their knowledge or their time with me, I'm super grateful for that opportunity to learn. And it goes for other cultures as well, like, Latinx cultures or, other Asian cultures, or, my Black friends are so amazing. I love spending time with them. And so I think, productive discomfort is one thing that we should all be shooting for. And the other one is, cultivating your sense of curiosity. I think that's what brought up for me, Santiago, when you're talking about those things. It's like, it's like so many people aren't interested in other cultures or other people, or what their history is, or how they came to be there, or why is my street named like this indigenous name? Like, what does it mean? What's the story behind it? Because there's always a story behind it. And, and there's so many amazing stories. Like, so why do we want to keep seeing the same one? That's boring. I want to see and learn new things. And so to be curious about why it is, a young indigenous person got shot in the street. Like, why did that happen? It's not just, oh, that's sad, or it's tragedy, or it's terrible. It's like, why? What was the situation? What were the systems that were in place that allowed that to happen? Because we did allow that to happen. And we keep allowing it to happen. And so, yeah, to be curious, because people are so interesting. They have such great stories, and they have such wisdom to share. And, to think you can get it all from the same place or the same sources is arrogant.
I just became acquainted with the term unconditional positive regard. And I'm not sure if either of you have heard this new term, or I don't even know how new it is. But it came to me in a session I was doing on anti-harassment in the workplace, and talking about bias and judgment, and how to approach every engagement and every relationship with that unconditional positive regard attitude can start you off in a good way. It's it might not be a clean slate, because I totally agree with you, Santiago. The moment you walk into a room, you don't have to open your mouth, but your body is read. Your color, your gender, if it's identifiable. If it's not identifiable, then that's even more outstanding. All of what you're wearing for class, and then descriptors of culture within that. And then the moment you open up your mouth, do you speak fluent English? And everything from the moment you walk into a room, and anybody who's not part of an oppressed group or community cannot understand what it's like to be an equity deserving individual who goes through that from childhood on up. I'm white coded, and so once I left my home village, things got easier. But I never denied who I was, or never said what my identity was. But growing up, it is what it is, in the sense of our society is so judgmental and stereotypes so easily. We still live within that time frame, that although we harken back and think about the Victorian era of ignorance and prejudice, we have not moved that far away from it. We're still having the same conversations about being invited into spaces of decision making and privilege. Yeah. So I know we've opened it up to any questions from the audience, and certainly if there's any more questions or ideas that are coming out, I guess for me too, it's the fact that COVID has happened in the last couple of years. That certainly affected our sector in a way that has shifted priorities in the work that I do. I see that work, the work of IDEA is not as important anymore as getting back into the transactional approach to what we do in the sector, or how the sector operates. And that's been somewhat upsetting to me. And I want to just, one last thing I forgot is, I work with a colleague, an amazing colleague in Montreal, Sarah Fancy, and she uses the acronym JEDI. So getting back, it's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's an acronym that she throws out these days. But yeah, I don't know if either of you want to talk about the last couple of years, and how you've negotiated the last couple of years of COVID within the sector.
Well, I guess speaking as somebody who's recovering from COVID, that's why I keep coughing. Um, uh, I guess I feel lucky that it's the first time I've had COVID. So I know many people have had it multiple times. Um, I I agree with you, Terri-Lynn, that as things are opening up, my sense is that a lot of racialized and Indigenous artists are being asked to come in and do some work, but and they set up, at least they're paying people now, and they're paying the compensation level is somewhat more fair for the type of work they're being asked to do. But it still feels like a little performative, like, because there's funding out there now to do this work. And so people are taking advantage of getting this funding. But it's still about diversity. It's like, having certain people in the room. A lot of times I've noticed they're more like emerging artists who may not necessarily know how to advocate for themselves or to negotiate the power dynamics. Um, I know personally myself, I'm often not invited into a room because I make people deeply uncomfortable. um, and so, but, and that's part of the reality too. Like, people have to make a choice of when they're going to speak up about things because they know that there are ramifications to that. Artists are, especially freelance artists, we're dependent on other people inviting us in to, whether it's work artistically or doing this work of equity. And if you're not presenting like the friendly, doing the extra emotional labor of making the other people comfortable while you're trying to deliver your message, you are the wrong racialized person to invite in the room. And so that can have real consequences or impacts to your career, both financially and in the kinds of opportunities you may or may not be offered. And so maybe I see more like, there's the good racialized person and the not good racialized person. And there seems to be more of, I don't think it's conscious. I just think that's the reality. I mean, but for sure, there's more work being done. But again, like I said, like exactly who is being invited to participate in that work. It's debatable if the right people are being asked. And like I said, there have been people who've made a career out of being the racialized person because they are not making people uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Valerie. I think a lot about, I graduated in 2019 from theater school. And then I was like barely a year out when the pandemic hit. And I was very lucky and privileged that my career took off during the pandemic. Why? I think that it was because I was the only outspoken racialized person in the community who was craving change and who was like pushing for that change. Um, but I think that, with the question about like COVID and I think that I was also, the re-sparks of Black Lives Matter in 2020 played a huge part in this shifting where we couldn't go anywhere but to stay at homes and be confronted by this racial issue made it very real for everybody. And on that regard, I think that that things really shifted in the community and my community, but also at a sector level. Now, the thing that I have noticed is that as we're moving on, and not to say that it's completely done, the pandemic, because, clearly it's still ongoing, our priorities have shifted. And my question is always, why? Why can't we have both being our priority. And I think, like that was the thing that I was talking about, how the notion of idea or all of these things that we're striving towards is that it all becomes like its own sole department. And I'm like, how about we look at that, all of these values or these aspirations in an intersectional way, where in the hiring process, relationship building, financial, I don't know, like structuring, whatever, that we keep in mind these values. I also like to encourage people to think as to why it is relevant to them. Why are they thinking about these values? Why is it important to them as individuals or as organizations or institutions? Why do they care about it? And I think that answering that why will help them define their actions, as to why does it matter? I was also thinking, so many things obviously about this journey, because I feel like it really makes me feel so sad about what Valerie was talking about, like the good racialized person, the one that is willing to, to take care of people's feelings, when in fact, I think that we tend to forget that we're all human beings, that behind the person who is advocating and doing all of this emotional labor, we feel things, and engaging in a conversation like this is tiring. Some of us are willing to take it on and to talk about it. I would probably have to eat another cookie, because I ate one before this panel, to take care of myself, right? But that is something that I do, and I believe in transformation. I believe in change, and I hold on to that hope that I see at times materialized in the way that we work and that way that we build relationships. But that doesn't mean that we can expect the same for every single, indigenous or racialized person to do the labor that some of us are doing, and that there is nothing wrong with that expectation of that emotional labor. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really great point, Santiago, about, the values of idea being foundational or embedded in everything that you do. As soon as somebody says we have a diversity committee, then I know that it's being put outside of its own thing. It's not actually a foundational value. And until that happens, it will always be an option or a box ticket, because it's literally to the side, rather than at the root. And that goes back to systems change again, right? You can't change the system if you're not addressing, applying those values to the systems that are embedded in everything that you do, whether it's your board, or whether it's the artistic work you program, or it's the people in leadership, the people who you build relationships with. Because those are all choices. And they should be conscious choices. I think maybe that's another issue, is like, this, as COVID kind of moves on, people are trying to go back to business as usual, right? And so the systems that they have, in place already, if you haven't interrogated or thought about why we do, and again, that question of why, Santiago, is super important. Like, why do we do this the way we do it? We've done it, so when I was earlier in my career and I needed to, supplement my income, I was a temp in offices rather than waiting tables. And so I was constantly going into different organizations, from really big, like the Port of Vancouver, to like really small, like the BC Housing Association or something, like, and doing, and oftentimes like they'd ask me to do something and I go, oh, why are you doing it this way? It'd be faster if you just did this. And oftentimes, instead of going, oh, great. I'm learning something new from somebody with a different perspective who has different experiences. They'll often go, well, we always done it this way. And I'm just going, well, why are we trying to do things? Why do we do things the same way and expect a different result? Right? And so again, that sense of curiosity, like, why are we doing it this way? If we want a different result, then we have to try something different. But it's not just like try stuff and like throw it like noodles or spaghetti against the wall and hope something sticks. Like, it needs to be intentional. You have to really think through why you're doing something. And if you want a different result, then how can we change in order to make our way to that different result? The systems are created by people.
Exactly.
So it needs people to change those systems. And as you say, Santiago, it needs all of us. Asking racialized people to solve racism is not only unfair, but impossible. Like asking women to fix the patriarchy, it is a similar thing. It's deeply unfair. It's exhausting and takes a lot of emotional labor and sacrifice. And I remember like having these conversations, and one person said to me, well, what about empathy? Like, shouldn't you have empathy for your oppressor? Really is what they were saying. And I'm going, I have empathy. I can put myself in their shoes. I can see the fear that they have of losing power, of losing status, of like the fear of sharing power, of having leadership look differently. I totally know I have empathy, but they don't have empathy for me. And why is it the responsibility of the oppressed to have empathy for their oppressor and not the other way around? Like, we are so often asked to do that. And again, we have to ask why. Because that upholds the system that benefits certain people, benefits a very smaller number of privileged people to the detriment of a much larger majority.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think we could probably go on forever, but as you're saying, Santiago, this is heavy, and we are doing these conversations to the point where it's we are the ones who are asked to change the system, and it's a lot of work. I have a lot of colleagues who won't go anywhere near things like this anymore, and because it's depleted them too much inside. So on that note, do either of you want to share any final words before we wrap up this session?
Well, my co-artistic producer would be mad if I didn't do a plug for a resource which will help people, in finding people to help them do this work, especially for arts consultants. And Santiago is part of it, is a member of culturebrew.art. So I just want to throw in there, I guess the chat is open to everybody else. Maybe I put in the Q&A is open to everybody. I don't know. But www.culturebrew, brew as in BREW, as in fermenting, .art. And it's, as I said, a nationwide searchable database. You have to subscribe to access the racialized and Indigenous artists. But it's super cheap. You can subscribe for as low as $6 a month. And you can also post opportunities on the site. You don't have to be a subscriber to do that. But if you're a non-subscriber, it's $25 to post an opportunity, soon going up to $30, I think in May. But it's a really great way to connect with Indigenous and racialized artists for all sorts of things, these kinds of panels or discussions, as well as, collaborators on artistic projects. And And there's space for the artists in their profiles to also put out, what kind of other marketable skills they have. So oftentimes they have skills like grant writing or editing, or they're cultural consultants, or they lead workshops and stuff. So it's a really great resource. I'm super excited. I mean, I'm biased because I helped create it, but for me, especially when I get a little disheartened that things aren't moving, like I can look in and there's literally hundreds of artists in there, and I go, oh my God, there's all these artists that I didn't know existed. Or I'm reminded of others that I hadn't worked in for a while, and I'm looking for people to work on projects. I go, oh yeah, why didn't I remember that, Santiago is out there and has specific skills that I need? Or so it's pretty exciting to just see the diversity of all the talent and skill and experience that BIPOC artists can offer and have been for so long, and people just didn't know how to find them or reach them. So check it out.
It is an amazing resource, and I just want to, highlight that. I feel like, as a racialized person myself, especially living on an island primarily, it's so easy to feel like you're disconnected from everybody else. And I really appreciate networks like that make you feel that you're not alone and that there is a way to connect and to be seen and to be heard. So thank you for that labor. On the note on community building, something that I just want to leave, something that I have, learning and also doing and reminding myself about, is that community building is non-transactional. I always think about, how do we get to know each other, and I think that is important to me about opening up and learning from one another, to open my heart and allow to be seen and to be heard, with the hopes that I can meet someone in the middle who I can grow with and build a relationship. I care a lot about that work. I care a lot about who is around me. And community can look and feel in many, many different ways, geographically speaking, physically speaking. So I just, would encourage us all to think about, what does community mean to you and how do you practice it?
I really want to thank you, Santiago, for reminding me about community, because that's one of the core values of Culture Brewed at Art. And I mentioned the side where people can find the artists, but for the artists themselves, we set it up so that there's a private and secure messaging system so that the artists can look through profiles and connect with each other. So one of the things I'd like to actually throw out there, speaking or thinking about the difference between the transactional and the relational, and how we all need to work together to do this, especially for arts consultants, this audience, I'd like to put out the challenge to you, like, not only would you use Culture Brewed at Art or recommend it to your various clients, but part of the real work of community building is encouraging the Indigenous and racialized artists to be part of the Culture Brewed at Art community, so we can find each other. It's like I said, I know a lot of people, but for me to be able to go and find more artists in different provinces or regions, or from a different cultural group, or that is just as important. For this is how you can contribute as as white people, as arts consultants who maybe not creating the art yourself, is to help BIPOC artists find each other and be part of a larger community. That's community building is all our responsibility.
And on that note, I think that's a beautiful end to this conversation at this time. I certainly want to thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your heart in this conversation. And I have learned so much, and I hope that we can keep going together to have conversations across Turtle Island. I want to thank the Arts Consultancy Canada, Victoria, Maurizio. Thank you for being behind the scenes and helping to support this webinar and spearhead these conversations, these important conversations. Thank you to everyone who's stuck around this long and for listening. And I wish you all a wonderful Wednesday, end of the day. And I hope where you are, the sun is shining bright on your day. Yeah, we'll go. Thank you.